My name is Jason Hayworth. I am the Chief Product Officer at Apica. With me is Daniel Bengtsson, our Director of Customer Success. So hopping right in, the traditional load testing environment will go through and actually have somebody drop in and start doing functional testing of individual elements within an application flow. And it's really common to say, it broke, it broke, it broke. Oh, hey, this works. Let's test it 10 bazillion times, and let's test it for all 50 functions. Well, a lot of testing teams start to get into that phase, and they realize that it's very time consuming and cumbersome to go through and test all those individual objects. So they start doing subsets of testing, and those things get smaller and smaller and smaller until you're no longer testing the full application. You're testing either subcomponents or a group of subcomponents to get your evaluation. The problem with that is that you get these fires burning in your environment, and suddenly your people that are on the phone are kind of getting freaked out because they can't really tell why it is these things have broken because they don't have good context around that space, and they didn't do QA testing with full user journeys. Their QA tests are, again, spot object tests. They put things into the real world, things fall over, they don't know why. Our job at Apica is to help our customers understand not only the why, but to make sure those things don't happen before they deploy to production. So the Apica platform, why load testing and monitoring? We use the same Apica synthetic test for all of our user journeys. We do transaction baselining. So again, this is, what does my app performance look like without user load? And then we monitor the transaction performance over time with those same scripts so that we can understand what my app performance is like during normal operations. And the output of that is a percentage of health, not just up down.
If you're monitoring those, could you use the monitoring to learn what the baseline is rather than coming up with the baseline on your own? Like, instead of being 100% synthetic, it's more of, let me learn what your users do and then replay that.
So yes, so we can do that. And actually, our monitoring scripts themselves, if you take your RUM data, we could extract your RUM data and pull it down and make a determination as to what your user journeys are actually doing. But the real catch of it is that you want to test a clean system. And you want to test a clean system so you know what performance is like without all that additional user load. So when we say performance testing, we're doing performance testing to make sure we capture those baselines ahead of time. So while you could capture some of that information to understand that, it wouldn't be as complete as if you were testing with the blue versus green environment.
But is your baseline, when you run through this performance test, just repeating the same thing multiple times to just add load rather than add variability?
So we can do multiple different user journey tests at the same time. So we can take different characteristics and different user profiles and stack multiple user profiles against that, and then go through and look at the way objects are actually hit the system, and then stack those objects up in such a way that we can create some of that variability inside of it. So, and you're 100, sorry.
No, go ahead.
Oh, you're 100% correct that we're not going to capture all the variable pieces inside of that, but there's kind of a level of fluency that you get to where capturing the variable is no longer of real value because it's just a fall off pattern of regular customer behavior. Like people get up and go to the bathroom in the middle of a transaction, or they stop and they get distracted by cat video somewhere. We don't want to grab that level of chaos engineering in the product, but with the product itself, you can actually use it as a chaos generating tool. So you can go through and you can build that stuff in.
Just to add to that question a little bit, we do, for the load testing scripts or performance scripts or monitoring script, we can feed dynamic data into them, either by using it's called a Apica data repository. So you can have things like, if you're testing an API that you're searching for things, you can feed different search terms into the script on the fly, or if it's user logins, so you don't log in with the same user every time to get variability when you run your load tests. That's very common.
Yeah, and actually, it's an if, then, or statement generator engine. So you can go through and find different if and or statements inside that space, and you can create your own stacked variables in that same regard. So if you see certain events happen during the load testing phase, you can actually have it kick off other parts of the test to show different types of issues in the network or different types of issues in the application. So we'll do a quick demo here with Daniel. We're going to do load testing at scale plus basic monitoring. He'll create and run a script and then show how we can reuse the script with different alert channels.
I'm Daniel Bengtsson, Director of Customer Success at Apica. And I'm going to do a demo here where we create a script against one of our demo applications. Then we're going to use that script to run a performance test in our load testing portal. and then take that same script and upload it to the monitoring portal. So we have that run 24/7 from the locations we choose. Just to start off, I'll show you just what we're testing here. So this is it's called Ticket Monster at the demo site we have. You can book event tickets for soccer games or concerts or something like that. This application also has an API, which we're going to test against today. And the scenario here is I'm on a development team. We've just published 2 new API endpoints. We want to, as best practice, we want to make sure we load test that before we put it in production. And once it's in production, we want to monitor that and make sure the performance is what we expect around the clock. So let me jump into the scripting tool we're going to use today. This is one of our scripting tools called Zebra Tester. It has a lot of capabilities and can test different protocols. In this case, it's going to be HTTPS. We're going to dive a little bit deeper into Zebra Tester later on. Just to mention how it works. In this case, it's going to work as a proxy. So I'm going to record the traffic I want to play back through Zebra Tester, so it catches that and all the requests. So let me pull up. In this case, I'm using a Postman collection where I have my 2 new API calls here. So the first thing I'll do is go ahead and start recording in Zebra Tester with our little widget here. So now we're recording, listening for traffic. Put this out of the way. I'll go back to Postman and I'll execute my first API call, which is listing all events available in this booking site. So I'll go ahead and just shoot that off, make sure we get a response. And that is taking quite some time, and that's probably why we need to load test this. There we go, we got our response back. It's a JSON listing all the events available here. We can quickly go back to Zebra Tester, refresh, make sure we caught that call, and we see the first call popped up here. The next thing I'll do is I'll actually go in and put in something we call a page break or a step name for the next call, so it's clear once we load test and monitor this what the step actually does. So the next step is going to be actually book a ticket. So I'll add that to the script, and we saw that pop up as a new page break here. I'll go back to Postman and execute my second API call. And that was pretty quick. So now I got back, confirmed I have booked a ticket. All right, let's refresh Zebra Tester, make sure we have that call captured as well. All right, we have got 2 calls here. The first one is listing all the events. Next one is actually performing a booking. So now I'm happy with that. So I'll go ahead and stop recording so we don't catch any other network traffic going through. And basically we have a working script here that I can just play back, replay recording, it'll play and just do the exact same calls all over again. But we want to make this a little bit dynamic so we can chain these API calls together. So I'm going to grab a random ID from the first call that lists all the events, insert that into the next call. So we book a different seat or a different venue every time we run this. To do that, I'll just click this first API call here. And that gives us the details around that URL call that we did. We got the request headers, the response headers. We got the actual response content as well, which is a JSON, which I can open up and take a look at if I want to see which value I actually want to grab to book a ticket. In this case, I know it's an ID for that specific seat. So I'll just go ahead and choose one of the selectors here. So I'm going to do a JSON path expression here. And I want to make this random. So I'll just tick this little box here. Sorry, this is probably very small for you guys. So this is the path I want to capture in the first call, test extract, and we see that value is 89. So that's an ID of a seat for this event. I can test extract several times to see that value changes. All right, I'll give that a name. I save it in a variable. I'll call it ticket ID. Extract that. So now we have the extraction for the first call. Next step would be to just insert into the second call to make sure we are actually testing different things every time. So in this case, what I'm going to replace here is in the request content, we're sending the ticket price ID is 118, and that's the ID we want to change to book a different ticket. So I'll just say here that I want to go ahead and replace that 118 with my variable ticket ID and assign.
I'm guessing you're going to be testing this against a non-live system.
Yeah, it's in this case, yes, but we have customers that do, QA, acceptance testing or productions, depending on what they test. If it's a business where they have zero traffic in production during nighttime, they might do night load test for in production. But the most common thing is to test in pre-prod.
How you test against an error prompt if that seat was already sold?
Yeah, exactly. So then you would have something that cleans that data up. We can have a script running on the side that cleans it up for you, so we don't grab actual seats, or some website if you pay with a credit card. So we make sure we have test data in the system. So depending on the application itself, maybe it's not possible to do production. It all depends on the data we're testing. Before I go ahead and run a load test against this, I'll just do a quick replay to make sure it actually works. So we're starting a replay, and it's going to execute the first URL call. We see here it passed. The second call passed. We know this script is working. So go ahead and close that. We have our working script that we can now use for load testing and monitoring. So I'll go ahead and save this. I'll call that Tech Field Day. Perfect. And I'll zoom in again. The only thing I need to do now is click this button called Generate Script. So it generates an executable script for us. There we go. We get a couple of dialogues that's gonna pop in and out. And there we go, we got a class file. Right, next step, we have a function script. Now I wanna perform a load test against this application. So I'll jump in here into our load testing platform, and I'm not gonna cover all the functions and the features of this platform. I'm gonna show a load test, how we perform a fairly straightforward load test. We can do it with multiple scripts at the same time, with different ramp up times or different durations and different virtual users. In this case, we're just gonna do one script. So I'll go here into new test, and I was logged out. Right, perfect. It takes me here. So you want me to select the script. So I'll go ahead here and pick my Tech Field Day script. Then the next step would be to choose how many users do we want to test this with. Well, so 10 to begin with, but typically best practice load testing, you want to do a baseline test first, which means start low, ramp it up, double your users all the way up until you break the site, basically. So you can just keep adding multiple tests after each other here. So I'll double this to 20, so we have 2 tests at least. Say the duration 2 minutes, so we can see a little bit of live data coming in. We'll ramp this up in 30 seconds. Right, and we see the projection. So after 30 seconds, all the virtual users are going to be hitting the application. Next step, choose a location for this, and I probably have a preset here. Oops. Not, I'll just pick a couple locations off the map here, save that. Right. So we're running this from US East, US West. We have a bunch of different options to customize your load test here. Set your custom percentiles. You can send input data into the script if we want to change something during execution. In this case, I'm just going to choose where I save this, which will be in my project called Tech Field Day. I'll add it to a new instance, and we should be good to go. We can add tags to this as well if you want to help us find this and sort through it later, either through the API or the dashboard. Right, so then I just say run it immediately. So I say initiate load test. And I think I actually am going to change the subscription I used for this. Yep. I'll just go ahead and click this instead. Typically, when you do this, you set a test up. You can save all the settings you do. You can save them as a preset. So you just have to choose that preset next time. It'll apply all the virtual users, all the locations, all that stuff. Right, so now we can initiate. And looks like I did lose my location here. There we go. All right, so now we have initiated a load test, and it takes us to the job page. And we see we have 2 jobs scheduled here. The first one is going to start immediately. So now we get a status update saying here that the job is picked up by the automation service. We're going to spin up the load generators in US East, US West, and then we're going to start the actual load test. And that should take a couple of seconds here to actually spin up.
Question about where the load test is running. Is that running from Apica cloud instances or customer cloud instances?
It's up to the customer. We have a public network where you can use. A lot of times customers might want a specific location. So either if they have it available in their cloud, or if we spin it up for them, or if they want to have a load generator inside of their network, which is what we call the hybrid model. So it's really up to the requirements of the customer where you want to run it from.
So here's a question.
Yep.
It's more of a kindergarten question, but please help me out with this. Would this only work with API-based calls, or could I have sort of a web form-based application that this would work with? So like something that essentially renders JavaScript, you know, my classic one is Oracle Application Express, Apex, right?
Yep.
Which is kind of close to being, you know, a 3-level, almost old client server.
Yeah.
Would be able to use this as well?
Yes, it's not going to, with Zebra testing, not going to actually render everything in a browser canvas.
Okay.
But we have functionality to actually execute JavaScripts that are in there, because you know, with single page applications now as well, some of those are actually needed to run to be able to make certain calls.
Okay.
And things like that. So yes.
So you could actually generate test data or sample test data for, I've got this form I want to fill in, right? And can we even generate bad data, right?
Yeah, yeah, absolutely.
I mean, like, you know, policy number where somebody types in special characters and underscores or something.
Exactly. You can attach test data like that to the script, either by having an input file or use our data repository, which is an in-memory database, where you can fill that with as much data as you want, and we'll just pick from that data as we run the script.
And we've got customers that actually generate bad data on purpose to make sure that they're not punching holes in certain areas where they know that there's a bad data call that could potentially take the system down. Yeah.
All right.
Okay. Just curious. Please continue.
Yep. All right. So the first test is running, and it's almost about to finish up here, but we jump in. So this is the live data from this load test running. We see we have 10 virtual users in the system right now. We've executed 200 loops with the script. We have 201 passed loops, but we do have 10 failures. So something went wrong for a few of those, which is, you know, why we test and want to see what happens. So I'll jump into the errors and see what they were. And then we can see here over time when they occurred. We can see what they were as well. So in this case, look at all of them are 500 errors, and we can actually zoom in on that a little bit and see the actual request headers and the response headers. In this case, we got a 500 internal server error, so probably got overloaded by these 10 users. We got a response content as well, and it just said same thing, internal server error. So we see here with 10 users, we did get a few errors, not too many, but so we know already with 10 users, this application is not really holding up. So while the next test starts to 20 users, I'll jump over to the monitoring portal and we'll use the same script to set it up there. So I'll jump into our synthetic platform, and we're going to cover a lot of this later on, this whole platform. So I'll just cover a little bit. This is the main dashboard where we have all our monitors running. In this case, I'm just going to go ahead and say, I'm going to create a new check. Right, so now we're going to set up this script here as a check. I'll choose, as you can see here, we get to select which check type we want to run here. In this case, I chose a zebra tester because that's the tool we used for this. So I will call this monitor tech field day. I can add tags to this. I'll call this is the most critical application we have. Next one, I get to choose a location. So let's see if we can run this from San Francisco today. And also choose our script, tech field day. And next, we choose the interval. We can run it very frequent if you want to. In this case, I set it to run every 5 minutes. We can set our thresholds and things like that for alerting, which we'll cover a little bit later. And I also put it in my checks here. So we organize it. And now I create that, which means that this is script is gonna be uploaded. It's gonna be distributed to the location we chose, and it's going to start executing every 5 minutes. After I do that, it takes me to the settings page, and we're not gonna cover all of this right now. We'll go into that a little bit deeper later on. But from here, I can go into check details and actually see the results of this running. So now it takes a minute or so because it's going to send that script out to the location we chose, and then it's gonna start that check run and get the results back. So it should come very quickly back, but it can take a couple of minutes sometimes. While that actually executes, we can go back to the load testing platform and see how the second test performed. Right, to see that the second test with 20 users also completed here. And we can see if we had any errors there as well. Looks like we had 12 errors, so the second test actually performed very similarly as the first one with 10 users. If you go to overview tab here, we'll see both of those tests in the same graph, so you can see the graph, what happens with throughput, error rate, and things like that as you ramp the users up. You see that their average response time, for example, went up a little bit when you double the users from 384 milliseconds to 443. So it would be interesting to run this with even higher user numbers to see what happens with the application. All right, let's go back to the monitoring platform.
Right now, you're showing us load testing by knocking on the front door. But if there's, most applications have other tiers in them and other things in play, firewalls to go through or proxies, database servers.
Mm-hmm.
Are you going to be touching on that end-to-end load testing to be able to tell where errors or performance degradations happen at those layers too, or is this purely knocking on the front door?
Typically, when you run a load test, you do want to have a variety of scripts. One that's maybe in this case hitting the API endpoints. Then you have a separate script that is actually using a proxy to reach another service that is actually part of this application. If that could be a backend service or hitting the database in some way. And that's when we use the run scenario, we call it in load testing, and we can have up to 120 different scripts running at the same time to make sure you cover everything. And how is this being affected by us loading the API front? So that's certainly something that's important to do when you do real load testing.
Okay, so you'll be touching on that in this demo later on?
Yeah, if we have time at the end, we can touch a little bit more on that as well. Yeah. All right. So now we have load tested this application. We were happy with the result, at least good enough to deploy. Now we have set it up as a monitor. It's running from San Francisco every 5 minutes. We have a result, and we can take a look at that and go in and see what happened. So we see here that it was a successful run. The average response time, or the response time for this check run specifically, was 931 milliseconds for the whole script. And we see the different steps in the script, how long they took. We saw what in the actual calls took time. We see that the DNS lookup time took 47 milliseconds. And then actually waiting for the response from the server took the longest. Now we have that up and running as a monitor. It's going to run 24/7 from San Francisco. We can set it up from as many locations as you want to be alerted if something happens. That was what I wanted to show in the first demo.
Essentially, you're just generating transactions.
Generating transaction, and in this case, it was an API.
Right,
But
right.
it could be other type of application. It could be legacy applications,
Right.
or web pages, or
Sure,
you name it. Yep.
And you're testing from a specific physical location in this case as well to make sure that your network setup is sufficiently robust and
Exactly.
no unexpected.
Exactly. Yeah, it's important to test from the geographical locations where you care about.
Mhm.
So you can set this up to run from a lot of different locations around the world,
Right.
to detect network outages and things like that.
Or especially if you had a failover from San Francisco to say San Juan, Puerto Rico, or wherever your disaster recovery site is. I need to have XYZ, 100 TPS or whatever it might be. Am I getting that when I go there? Only 50, oops. So that'd be another value behind the baselining.
Exactly. And then you
Okay.
can set it up so that, well, only if these two locations fail, then I want to be alerted. If only one
I see.
fails, things like that. So geographical locations is important and try to.
And the synthetic function is testing the whole application all the way through the transaction pipeline. So it's testing all those different network components along the way.
Okay.
And while you're not getting a direct readout saying this firewall, this router, what we can do is we can set up scenario sets where we actually ping the entire data path. So you can actually go through and you can actually get the response time metrics from the firewall. So let's say I want to test a firewall in a specific region or a specific zone.
But
Cool.
before you give up on that demo, the question I have is, have you actually run this against self?
Against the Apica platform. Yes.
Against the Apica platform?
Yeah.
Yes.
We have.
Okay.
Yeah, we used
We
this
do.
in development actually before
Yeah.
we release. Yep.
So how many bugs did that generate?
It's a continuous iteration, continuous development process. So we actually do, we find bugs in our own code all the time and we use it to fix it, right? So I mean, that's kind of the point of it. And we have those different infrastructure elements within our own environment, and being able to track those different infrastructure elements and having those subsequent tests is key to what we do. And we've got several customers that actually use us in these stacked scenarios where they're going to test APIs, they're going to test web front ends, they're going to test other application sets, and they create these different scenario sets with all the tests loaded inside of them. So you would create, let's say, a test for this specific load environment with these customers in this area, and then you can actually basically do canary tests that get set up in different locations where you know things are supposed to be bad. And if the things where things are supposed to be bad, if that test baseline and the test baseline that's happening that's close to that spot start to get closer to each other, it's a very clear indication that the backend system's having an issue. So there's just different ways to model your data sets to look at these, and it gives you, it's a really flexible tool to give you lots of different ways to try to break things and create chaos in your own environment before you put it out to the public.